So let's say you have this person within your circles who you probably send like 2,000 shillings a month.
Who could they be? Like,
It can be a relative, it can be a cousin, it can be that friend of yours, and it might be something as simple as, you're on postpay, Safaricom. It costs 2,000 shillings a month. So I will be doing this for you. Do you know, if your will does not include me, I can come and claim because I have been receiving a benefit from you on a regular basis, then I am technically a dependent.
hello everybody. It's Mark Karaki with Roots Africa. Welcoming you to another episode of the Roots Africa podcast. At Roots Africa, our mission is to help members of our African diaspora to access Africa's real estate opportunity in a high-trust, turnkey way. I spent many years in the diaspora, so this is a problem that is near and dear to my heart. And I built something that I would like to have had when I was out there, so that my interest was to be able to actually secure my financial future through real estate when I was living in the diaspora. So biggest challenge was the lack of trust, lack of reliable process, reliable information, reliable people you can work with to make that happen. So that's why that's why we built Roots Africa, and that's what we're looking to do. So this podcast is really about that whole topic. And so this week we have an exciting element of our holistic solution, and we call it legal structuring, for want of a better term. But essentially, this is the legal lens of real estate kind of process, ownership, transfer, tax, all that stuff. So we figured we would, as part of our solution set, instantiate a service that we call legal structuring to help individuals navigate that element. And just from our research, we found that this is a huge gap. There's a huge gap between individuals who are real estate investors and the legal solutions that can be helpful to them. So today we're going to be talking about an element of that, a critical one, real estate asset ownership, succession and transfer as part of our legal structuring offering. So we provide services to help individuals do things better, more efficiently, in the right way, so to speak. So today we have one of our very own homegrown talent, if we can call him that, Mr. Samuel Chege, who's part of our legal team here at Roots Africa and our broader set of companies at Impact Africa. So, Mr. Chege, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah.
Very nice to be here. It's different being on the other side of the microphone. I'm looking forward to this.
So, as a legal head, I'm wondering if you've kind of instructed yourself, or what can I say, what can I not say? I can tell you, you can be free, right? Everything.
No, I think especially this particular product is very close and dear to me, because I did happen to live in the diaspora myself for about 2 years. Yeah. And I interacted with a lot of guys who I know for a fact this would be very helpful to. I think the biggest challenge when we're dealing with anything legal is the lack of awareness. Yep. People do not know, and it's not their fault. Yeah. We spend years and years in school just learning, and at the end, in fact, my first day of class, my lecturer told us that you'll come in knowing nothing and you will leave knowing nothing. So the only thing that you will learn is how to express your nothingness. So
I love your lecture. Your lecturer.
That was literally day one of law school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
in Kenya?
No, that was in Kenya. So fantastic. Literally, straight out of high school, first thing I learned, you know nothing, you will leave here knowing nothing. But expressing that nothingness, I think that's why we're here. So I'm sure we'll learn a few things. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, look, I'm excited to kind of share you with our audience because working with you is fun. We learn a lot, right? At our group of companies here every day. It's a million miles an hour.
Yeah.
So it's very different than your education.
It is. I think it's how they tell you what you see versus what you get. Yeah, so I think translating what we know into how it applies into the field is very different, but also very interesting.
Yeah. So Yeah, so fantastic. So let's just dive into the topic. We're focusing on real estate today.
Yeah.
At our group of companies, we deal with a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Everything from setting up entities to figuring out tax strategy to litigation, right? We deal with it all.
Yeah.
But today we're going to be focusing in the Roots Africa context, which is really talking about real estate asset ownership, and focusing from a succession and transfer kind of lens. Cindy?
Yeah.
So the first natural question was, we're preparing for this, we're thinking, okay, where do we start? How do we get into this conversation? And we're always starting from the known to the unknown, so that people can track with us. So the first easy softball kind of topic is, how do people typically own property? Majority of the people at the retail level, at the individual level, how do people typically own property, right?
Yeah, I think this is very ingrained in us. Basically, we've grown up, we've seen our parents do this, and what we tend to do ourselves, that is guys my age and in my age group, is we think of property ownership in terms of the title deed. Mm-hmm. And the title deed, what that makes you think is that as long as it's not in your name, you do not own this property.
Mm-hmm. So the title deed needs to be in your name.
So the title deed needs to be in your name. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, when it comes to property ownership, for them, their measure of ownership is whether this title document or this ownership document is in their name. Mm-hmm. And that is typically what we find. It's what our parents did, probably what our grandparents did, what we are doing, and unless we actually are intentional about it, is what our kids will end up doing.
Yeah. So if I was listening to this, I would be alarm bells be going off.
Yeah.
Who else's name could this be in? What do you mean? It seems like it's antithetical to reality. It doesn't comport with our understanding of how you own anything. It better be in your name.
Yeah.
So what are the alternatives?
You see, the thing is, yes, you can own this in your name, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. But as we continue this conversation, we'll find that this is a very inefficient manner to own property. Mm-hmm. And simply because, you see, at the point of acquisition, a lot of us are so excited about getting this property. Finally, probably we've been saving for months, years, whatever period, you've maybe even taken out loans. And so at the end of the day, we're just so excited to see this document bearing your name, mm-hmm. showing that you own something. Mm-hmm. And it's a very exciting process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we rarely sit down to think about, okay, now that it's in my name, how do I want to deal with this property moving forward? Mm-hmm. And if you look around, if you look at probably now guys in the diaspora, a lot of these guys have grown up hearing things like trusts, companies, you see people are transferring shares and whatnot. Mm-hmm. You never really understand what people own. And simply, the main reason for this is because of the kind of structures they put in place as they are acquiring these properties. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having property in your name, just that it is not the most efficient way of owning this property.
And it also depends on your intent.
Yep.
Like thinking through beyond the property, like looking into the future and saying, okay, what is really my intention here?
Yeah.
So that you're thinking ahead, right? So you're not reacting to situations as they arise, because life is all about like situations arising over time. Yeah. Things will happen. So when we talk about like just at a high level, what are the other ways people can actually own property? If you just name them without going into the specific details, because we'll go into the benefits and of all that later on. So I can own it in my name.
Yeah.
How else can I own property?
Very high level, you've probably heard of things called trusts. We hear of trust fund babies. You wonder how these things come about. People are like, oh, I want to be a trust fund baby and whatnot. So trusts are one way you can actually do this. You can own property through companies and legal entities. The thing about these entities is that they have a legal identity. Because they have a legal identity, these are your companies, your LLPs, etc. Because they have a legal identity, they can legally own property. So if you own this entity that owns this property, you actually own the property, but you are doing it in a more efficient manner.
Yeah. And if, again, I think it depends on what somebody's intent is, right? Thinking over and above, I own the property, but what are the downstream potentialities of owning that property? For example, if I wanted to transfer it, or if I want to protect it in some way from, all other kinds of occurrences, right? So it's thinking strategically as opposed to thinking, in a short-term way. So, if you think about like one of the topics that becomes important in this context, right? The thing that will eventually happen to all of us is we will not be around at some point, right? And we all know about the we've all heard about the stories of how families kind of, have these issues of transferring of ownership of assets and all the chagrin and heartache that brings about because their forebearers didn't plan accordingly. I remember talking to one of our prospective clients, and he talked about how it took them when their patriarch passed on. I think it took them 14 years across a huge spread out family, right, extended family, to go through the process of the will and, transferring of ownership and assets and who owns what and so on and so forth. 14 years before that whole thing played out. It was insane. And we're talking to him about the trust as an alternative measure for him to actually prepare for the inevitable that will hit all of us. So, so it kind of rang, it hit home very, very powerfully there because 14 years is a long time. He mentioned that some of the people who were even part of that conversation also passed on. So they didn't even, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny. So typically we dive into that particular topic, right? Because it makes sense for everybody, right? How do people typically transfer ownership, right, when it comes to property or almost any other asset, but more property right now in this topic?
Yeah, you've actually raised a very good point because a lot of people think as long as they've prepared a will, then their property is safe. It will pass in accordance to how basically their wishes. But the issue is there are so many technicalities involved in preparation of a will. It's not simply listing down what you want done with your property in the event of your untimely death. And what this looks like is, because there are certain, let me call them irreducible minimums that wills have to have in order for them to be valid. And even if you do have a valid will, it is not a guarantee that things will pass in the manner that you have put down in the will. Because again, in the event of your death, you don't know what might come up. It is not as lawyers, we're trained to be risk averse. So we basically try and mitigate any potential risks that we see. And while wills are good, and it is way better than not having one, it is not the most efficient way of ensuring property passes in the manner that you wish. So for example, in the drafting of a will, there are signatures that are required. These signatures have to be witnessed and have to be done in a certain way. So you have a valid will, but then when it comes to the signing of the will, because you need to have witnesses, then let's say that is not observed. So what does the court do? It invalidates the will.
Or how often does something like that happen?
It actually happens more often than you think. Because unless someone engages the services of a lawyer in the preparation of a will, you writing down what you would want might not necessarily result in you getting what it is you want.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
so you can't write your own will without. It's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea. People say lawyers are expensive, but they're expensive for a reason. Because the risk that they're helping you to avert is quite big.
Right.
Yeah, so all these small technicalities.
Cost of cure,
Exactly.
Sometimes you can't even cure it because you're not even around to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you see, you are basically ensuring that, in engaging in structuring methods, you're ensuring that what you want actually passes as you have envisioned it. Yeah, and that is now the main thing that we'll probably get into a bit later on. Yes, but when it comes to these wills, in addition to them not being concrete, they've been invalidated for very many things. So for example, Mark, let me ask you this. Do you, let's say in your spirit of being generous, support someone? Even if it's with as little as maybe
kids,
2K.
yes.
Okay, outside of your kids. So let's say you have this person within your circles who you probably send like 2,000 shillings a month.
Who could they be? Like,
it can be a relative, it can be a cousin, it can be that friend of yours, or
So in Kenya there are all kinds of.
There are all kinds of yes.
There's a well-trodden path along those support.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Which goes into these murky areas where.
Exactly. But now you see, for example, so let's say in this case, I am the one who's benefiting from this 2K you're sending a month. You're like, you know what?
It could be even like a nephew.
Exactly.
Right? Of a sibling who passed. It could be as innocent as that.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And it might be something as simple as, you know what, you're on postpay, Safaricom. It costs 2,000 shillings a month. So I will be doing this for you.
Okay.
And I do this for you every single month for the past like 2-3 years. Do you know if your will does not include me, I can come and claim because I have been receiving a benefit from you on a regular basis, then I am technically a dependent. So I am entitled to your property. And that is an argument that has been made and has passed in the courts.
Amazing.
You say we are not related,
right?
And I am not in your will. You've left your kids everything. You've done
That's a
everything.
major loophole.
Yeah, exactly. But because you did not tell your lawyer that there's someone you're supporting, then it becomes an issue because they can prove they were depending on you.
I would love to go into the details of the thresholds, how long, but we'll kind of take a step back. The point there is wills are often not worth the paper they are written, can be, right?
But even then, it's quite big. But then also think about it this way. Let's say you've done everything, right? You've consulted a lawyer. You have decided to go, you have passed away, and now they're executing your will as is. So looking at the timelines, one of the things that happens when you are dealing with a will is that regardless of whether or not you left a will, there's something called a grant of probate. And what that looks like is basically the court giving you the authority to act, or rather whoever is the administrator in your property, to act for your estate. And there's a minimum wait period before this is given, because in addition to one of the formalities that has to be met is that it has to be advertised in the Kenya Gazette. And this advertisement period, from the date of advertisement, you have to wait for a minimum of 6 months.
So let's take a step back here.
Yeah.
So let's play it like a real scenario.
So a real scenario. Let's say let's call this person X. Person X passes away today. So let's give it a month before the funeral and everything. So all these things are done. So already a month has passed. Then now we go to court because person X has a valid will. We go to court and let's assume that there are no problematic beneficiaries involved. So everyone is okay with what person X's will says. There's no one coming out of the woodwork and whatnot. So if we put a rush on it, let's say by the time the court is allowing us or granting us this, allowing us to publish this notice in the Gazette, about 2 months have gone by. So you see we're already at month number 4.
Right.
Yeah. So now at month number 4, we need to wait for a minimum.
So a will is not a private...
No. It's also not private because you see, again, as long as the way property in Kenya passes is that even if
is
you
it
have
only
left,
when it's associated with the property or...
No, basically it's everything.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's your whole estate. So this is your cash in bank. These are your cars. These are your assets. Basically everything that you've accumulated.
No wonder people come out of the woodwork.
Exactly. Because you see, the moment it is advertised, because it is a legal requirement that it needs to be advertised, person X and X, he has passed away, the estate is being administered by so-and-so, the court is going to grant them letters of administration. So what we call a grant, they're going to be granted the power to administer this estate.
Right.
Before that power is granted, it has to be published in the Kenya Gazette, and then it will take at least 6 months before it is confirmed. So all in all, even if you have a valid will, you're looking at an average wait period of not less than a year. Between
just for the process
to declare just so that the representatives of your estate have the authority to deal in your estate. And you see, we have not even put in the various other factors that come into play. You're dealing with registries, if you're dealing with property, for example. So you have the lands registry, which can be a headache by itself. The court process, again, we have assumed this is a very straightforward matter, but it's rarely straightforward. Like you've said, there are people who come out of the woodwork. They're like, hey, manze, so-and-so gave me a child. Nini then. They're like, we need to go do DNA testing first. So you see, this is adding time. It gets messy. Yeah, and you see, now this is simply because this particular person X chose to own this property in their name. Now that is one of the inefficiencies.
And the will as the instrument of transfer or bequeathing it to the
exactly.
Yeah. Wow. So it's just a year before anything happens.
Yeah.
Right. Putting it out in the public so that folks can kind of come out of the woodwork and invent all kinds of narratives. Take shots at that. What to me sounds like a very loosely defined legal framework, right? That governs wills, right?
It's
so
very
porous.
tricky.
Yeah. Okay, so inefficient, not private. To me, those are the things that jump out at me right off the bat. The other thing is the cost element. I mean, because there has to, because for that process to play out, you have to kind of engage some professionals to help you with that. And as you said, lawyers don't come cheap.
Yes.
So what are the cost considerations in terms of this process for the will, as a vehicle for
the transfer process.
Yeah.
So just 1 second before I mention the cost element, just so that you can also understand some of the complexities. You see, this was a very ideal situation.
Okay.
1 year.
Yeah.
What happens if person X did not have a will? You see, that's a whole other process.
Okay, we've assumed that
we've assumed person X had a will.
Right?
Yeah,
right,
because
right.
I mean, again, one of the topics that is somewhat taboo to us Africans is the topic of death. We never really try. We try as much. We avoid it because I don't know. It's like a superstition. If we talk about it, it will happen. Yeah. Right. So let's say person X never had a will. So what happens in this case? Whatever we've talked about just gets compounded.
Okay.
So we were looking at a best case scenario of at least a year. Now we are looking at a best case scenario of like 3-4 years. Or in other cases, like you've talked about, the experience you've had with the client you're engaging, 14 years. I mean, there's a very famous...
I wonder if he had a will. Probably didn't have a will. Is it possible for you to have a will and it takes 14 years, I guess is the question?
It is possible. Again, if the court invalidates the will.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the court has invalidated the will, then that happens. Or in the event that your will is proved not to have been constructed in the right manner. Like I said, wills are very technical. You have to meet certain irreducible minimums for them to be valid.
Wow.
Yeah, so again, this is not a guarantee. It is good. It's something that is important.
It's better than not having one.
It's better than not having one.
Yeah.
But then, if you're in the process of mitigating risk, you might as well mitigate further by having something that is better than a will. And now we come down to the cost element that you've talked about. Now, as lawyers, we have something we call legal fees. Legal fees, more often than not, is usually charged. We have a document, actually a law, called the Advocate's Remuneration Order. It guides how much you're supposed to charge.
This is the craziest thing, because this is... I don't believe this exists in my experience in the US. I don't think they have such a law that says you can't bill somebody less than this amount or you'll be in trouble. Right? That's the craziest thing. That sounds to me like, where did this come from?
It's actually, just because you see, again, because legal services are not cheap. So one of the ways of ensuring...
Makes it worse.
It actually makes it... It can make it worse.
Because
but then you also think about
below
it
this, so it's not a marketplace.
Yeah.
It's rigged.
It's
in a way,
again,
because
it
a
depends.
marketplace should create competition. This basically says, this is the floor. How? This sounds communist. It's the craziest thing. But anyway, separate thing. It is what it is.
It is what it is. What I'll say is, because again, for example, for me to be seated here, I have gone through a minimum of at least 6 years of training.
But that's your problem.
Yes. But then you see, the thing now, the question becomes this, Mark. I did my 6 years. I passed very well, got very good grades. Someone did their 6 years, barely made it through. And then because we have somewhat similar knowledge, probably different levels of execution, they come in and tell you, you know what, this guy is telling you this. And then you're like, I know a guy. So this guy that you know is actually charging you cheaper. But then what happens? Again, cost of cure. Because if it goes wrong, so you see what I believe in their wisdom or lack thereof, our predecessors set this thing we call...
This is colonial shit, man. I don't know.
Advocate's Remuneration Order.
This sounds colonial to me.
There's a minimum
Those
that we are allowed...
White folks with white wigs, big wigs, bro, they were like, let's... Anyway.
Yes. So...
maybe they were trying to make it too expensive for Africans to... have legal services back during colonial days. Anyway, I'm digressing.
Yes.
Let's move forward with with your train of thought.
Okay, so we're talking about the minimum you're allowed to charge. So the ARO, Advocate's Remuneration Order, gives us the minimum you're allowed to charge per transaction. Yeah, and so this is usually calculated. The legal fee is calculated usually as a percentage. It can be, there's a graduating scale, but it's normally a percentage of the value of the property. So what does this mean? Think about it this way.
So the only way I can price something
is
based on some other thing.
So I can, like, if you were to come to me and tell me, okay, what is your quote for this? I would, first of all, in order for me to give you an accurate quote, I'd be like, what is the value of your estate?
Jesus Christ!
So
now
let's
you're a beneficiary.
It might be technically, right? But then I'll think about it in this manner. Let's say the only thing that you have is an apartment in Nairobi. This apartment is worth about 10 million shillings. This is 10 million Kenya shillings. So this is just a very rough example. If I was to execute this, in addition to maybe the costs for the process, and this looks like the court fees I'd pay, because we would still have to go and execute this in court, as well as what I would need to be paid for drafting the various agreements that would be involved. We are looking at a minimum of maybe 200 to 50K. That is on the lower side. And you see, all you have is this one apartment. And this is not in addition to any other properties that you have. Maybe you had a car, you have bank accounts, you have all these other things. If you want to transfer this property, again, Kenya's inheritance tax system is a bit lenient.
Efficient, yeah.
Yeah, so if this is a direct beneficiary, your child, your spouse, they might waive stamp duty. But if this is someone, there's something known as the order of consanguinity. It means how close is this person to you. Yeah, so if this person does not fall within that order, you might find that there might be some tax implications. So what is stamp duty? In Nairobi, or in any urban center, you're looking at 4% of the value of the property. Yeah. So you see, in this case, we had the 10 million shilling apartment. So you're looking at least, in addition to the 2 to 50K in legal fees, you're looking at stamp duty of, let's say, 400K. And now this is unavoidable because that is the only way the property can pass. So there are quite a number of inefficiencies. When you think about it, it's very good to have property in your name. But when you think about the end goal, like now the end goal here being, how do you want to deal with this property in the long term? Then you start seeing that there are gaps. There are things we need to fill in just to make sure that what you want actually happens in the manner that you'd want it to happen.
To happen,
yeah. And so that is what the Roots Legal Structuring product is all about.
Yeah, helping people think long term, right? And planning for that, right? Which is interesting. Like when we started this podcast, you mentioned trust fund babies, right? And that is typically associated with the well-off, the well-heeled, right? Folks who have, in the top, maybe the 1%. People talk about them. They basically invest in these types of structures, in thinking, legacy and so on and so forth, and the rest of, below a certain kind of, I would call it like a socioeconomic level, people don't think that way.
They do not.
Even when there's a lot of inefficiency risk, right? Even at a certain level of income. So it's the reason why I thought that it's important that we do this was because, look, at first I was just thinking about it from just the tax side of things, right? But there are all these other considerations around like honor transfer and the complexities of that as we kind of were, digging into this, and we found out that it's more complicated than just simple tax efficiency, right?
Yes.
There's also, like you said, there's also just the risk, right? Of the cost is the main one you've covered here. Another thing we haven't talked about is the risk associated with owning something just in your name, right? Let's say, it can be attached to some activity that you've done or some business, that has gone wrong, or those attachments, right? So if it's in your name, how risky is how even before you pass on, right? What are the risks of owning something in your name in lieu of it being attached to for some business dealing that you had, or something has happened? Let's even talk about like a health emergency, or that you now owe some entity some money, right? How real is that? How is that a thing?
Yeah, it is a thing, because again, like we said, this is all about risk mitigation. Now, when you have property in your name, this forms part of your estate. And what this means is that if you have any debts, however they arise, then in dealing with these debts, this property or these assets that you own will form part of what is going to be liquidated to pay off the debts if it gets to that point. So let's say, again, in this situation, I happen to have a wife, I have 2 children, we have a home. Let's say we've bought an apartment in Nairobi. I happen to be a risky businessman. I like putting my eggs in many baskets. And so I do one too many deals and one of them backfires. So they come and claim against me individually. So what would happen? This home where my wife and 2 kids live suddenly becomes available to the creditors as a way of them mitigating their losses, simply because it is in my name.
Yeah.
And you see, now those are some of the risks that we are talking about. The good thing, like we talked about earlier, when we're dealing with legal structuring, because we are using bodies that have a legal identity, then they can own property that is not that is separate from yourself. Exactly, that's the phrase. So it is separate from yourself. And what this simply means is that you own this property or you own this asset, but it is not part of your estate. So in the event of anything, there is actually an additional layer of protection between what you have and what you want your beneficiaries to enjoy. So in this case, for example, let's say I had put this particular house in a trust. Because of the way trusts are structured, then there is no way that these creditors would come and claim from that trust. They would be able, it would not form part of my estate because it is legally owned by another body. And because of that, I know that regardless of whatever it is that I am trying to do, maybe, again, putting my eggs in many baskets, I am still assured of the fact that even if it backfires, my children, my wife, my family, they are well covered. Yeah. They are taken care of. Yeah. Our home is not at risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is.
Right?
It is.
That one is even. People just don't think about these things, right?
They really do not.
Yeah.
And you see, the other thing that we can actually mention here is the element of privacy. Again, like we said, the way Kenya is structured is that in order to execute, whether you've left things through a will or without a will, either way, execution happens through the courts. And anything that is filed in court is a public document, which means that if anyone looks hard enough, they will find it. So it is also not possible for you to keep private the things that you own. Part of the reason you find people coming out of the woodwork is because they suddenly realize, hey, by the way, so-and-so actually had some bit of property. They had some bit of, they were well off. So let me see what else I can get. I can benefit from this. But now, because again, putting in the layer between yourself and this property that you have, putting it in in a structure that is separate from you, creates that insulation.
A layer of privacy.
Yes, there's a layer of privacy because it never makes it to the court papers.
Right.
So as far as people are concerned, they do not know what you have other than what you want them to know you have.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, we can't gloss over the fact that there is this, for one of a better term, acquisitive relationship between local family members and diasporans, right? They see them as a come up. They see them as a source of whatever it is that they need, right? And so there's that acquisitive kind of like, what can I get, right? And so, when you're a member of that community, you have to be you're cognizant of that fact. If you're not, you should be, right? And you should, seek ways to kind of protect your assets. Privacy is a big one. Nobody should be able to kind of know what you have if in the event something surfaces in the courts or something of that nature. So having an entity, basically having your assets, real estate or otherwise, owned through a third entity, whether it's a trust or a S corp or whatever it is, whatever the structure is, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's just smart, for want of a better term, business, but it's just life skills.
Yep.
Fundamentally, right?
Street smarts.
You know how people talk about financial literacy, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing that we all talk about.
Yeah.
But there's this thing called, what would we call it? Like, for one of a without term, legal literacy. So we need to kind of invent something that helps people develop that basic awareness of how things that are real and that happen to all of us at some point, how they'll affect them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just base layer legal literacy is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, and I think even as we started, I think I highlighted one of the biggest challenges I've faced in my profession is the lack of awareness. People might be willing, but they simply do not know. Yeah, and you see, you cannot protect against something you're not familiar with. Or even if you know, you think that, this is beyond my reach.
Yeah. And there's people are intimidated with the whole profession.
Yes.
Right? And maybe you guys like it that way. I don't know.
Well, we do enjoy the occasional big word here and there. I am really trying not to put them in there and believe that you understand that I did go to school. I can use them, but then the goal of this is there's already too much legal jargon.
Yeah.
You think lawyers...
What is it now?
Like,
let's simplify.
Yeah, so putting it very simply, when you're talking about legal structuring, what you're saying is this. You have property or you have assets. Very good. Now, let us help you own these assets efficiently.
And more efficiently, eliminate risk.
Yes, this is in relation to risk.
Right.
So you see, like what we've been able to do is just point out what people did not know concerning what they know. And what this means, again, without sounding too complicated, we've known about wills, we've known about the probate process in court, we've known about owning assets in our names. We believe that this provides us protection, and it does.
Right.
It really does.
Right.
But there's this other side that we've just discussed that we were not familiar with.
Right.
Now that we know, what we are here to help you do is basically
Prepare.
put that layer of protection and prepare. You, because you know this, now you can mitigate against it.
Yeah. And let's kind of track back to the cost thing, because you gave an example of a $10 million Kenya shilling property. I mean, that's kind of at the that's on the low side in terms of what somebody aspires to own, right? So people can have estates if you've been working for so many years to build it out.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're going to be beyond a 10 million Kenya shilling apartment,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
That's not the goal, right? The goal is to be 10 times that, right? And so from a cost perspective, if somebody finds themselves on the odd end of having to the example you're giving of, execute a will or so on and so forth, let's say I have 10 times that. I have 100 million, or let's put it in dollars, right? So people around the world can follow.
Yeah.
Let's say I have $1 million in assets, right?
Yep.
And the cost of executing against that process of, the will process. What do you call it? Probate? What's
Yes, through that probate process. Again, if you have $1 million, a very conservative guess would be at least 10 to 15% of that would be used in the succession process if you do not plan for it. Yeah. Because you see, now the other thing you need to consider, especially as someone in the diaspora.
I thought you were going to be like, okay, wow. I thought you were going to be 5%.
No, think about it this way.
Yeah.
Because you're in the diaspora, you're not only dealing with Kenyan law, you're also dealing with the laws of whichever country you're in.
Right.
You have legal fees on that end. You have legal fees potentially on that end. You have legal fees on this end. And then there are also a lot of things that come up during the process that you have probably not foreseen.
Yep.
So actually, that is a very conservative figure. Because if you are being realistic, if we, let's say, again, I am not an actuary, so I cannot account for every possible scenario. But realistically speaking, we might be looking even to as high as 20%.
Jesus.
Yeah, because all these things that we have not foreseen, we do not know the kind of evolution the law will undergo. We do not know what taxes might be introduced in future.
We don't.
We simply do not know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so...
But even as it is, what we know right now is still...
It's still quite high.
15-20%.
Yes, and while engaging in mitigation strategies, like those that Roots offer, will cost you barely a fraction of that.
It's just planning ahead, man.
It's actually literally just planning ahead.
Yeah.
So it sounds, because again, back to the example you talked about, if you had the 10 million shilling, sorry to bring us back to Kenya shilling, but in that specific example, you see you already spent close to 1 million shillings in taxes and the probate process. That is literally 10% of the value of that property. And that is in assuming that everything went well and that was the only property that we were dealing with.
Right. Wow. So let's talk about, the solutions
Yes.
in terms of, what are the alternatives here? You've been mentioning trusts, these are the legal entities. So really quickly, just kind of talking about the benefits of trusts, when they apply and when somebody should consider them, and the other entities, the other types of entities as well.
All right. So in Roots, we have basically two main products under legal structuring. We're looking at either legacy planning or succession planning. Again, this will differ from person to person, and that is why it is important to book a call for us to understand your needs and help you structure based on what it is you need.
Right.
But then in terms of the advantages, this comes to what it is that you want. Is this for business? Are you doing this to generate profit? Are you doing this to create legacy? Are you doing this simply to ensure that future generations are taken care of? Or maybe, might you have an errant child here and there who you are worried might squander whatever it is you leave them.
Right.
Or, as you get older, you have grandkids, you want to ensure that they are provided for.
Right.
Because you might not be there to see them grow up. And all these things, there are so many things. It depends on what is most important to you.
Right.
But one of the things, the advantages that you experience from having a legal structure in place, cut across the board, regardless of the structure that you're using. And one of the things that happens is that you will have control over the assets that you have, asset distribution. Because we are doing this thing during your lifetime, we will be able to structure this exactly as you see fit. So is this part, for example, you have this property, and let's say your friend has been really instrumental in your life, and you want to leave them this property. You see, this is something which, for example, you cannot be able to do without a will under the typical circumstance. And even in a will, there's still the element of, let's say, your kids coming in and saying, no, this should have been left to us, not to this particular person. By having a structure in place, you can be able to ensure that whatever it is you want done, you basically have control over the process.
It gets done the way you
want it done.
It doesn't, fall,
through the cracks.
Yeah, or what I was looking for. It just becomes a victim of circumstances, for want of a better term. Yeah, that's a big deal. Right?
That is a big deal because, after you have worked all these years, you have generated all this revenue, you have built this portfolio for yourself. You want to
don't want to lose it into just oblivion or being squandered by ne'er-do-wells, right? You want to have, that's an important one.
Let's say, for example, another thing that we don't really consider, again, we live in a very, for lack of a better word, conniving world.
No. Yes.
We have some people who are literally specialists at ensuring they get that which you have.
Yeah.
And so you might be smart enough for this to not affect you.
Right.
But what happens to your beneficiaries?
Right.
What happens to, let's say, again, in the event of an untimely death, your child is below 18. So comes and advises them, you know what, you need to do this, you need to do that. Yeah, but then you, in your wisdom, had you been around, who would have told them, no.
That's not
the way to go.
So let's talk about, I guess as we wrap up here, because there's so much we'll have part 2 for this, right? We'll dig into other topics, but fundamentally, what are the solutions that somebody should consider, right?
Okay.
You've mentioned trusts.
So we've mentioned trusts. We can also look into companies. Companies are one of the things. I know we are familiar with companies, but then there's a way we can structure companies to ensure that your needs are met. We also can look into limited liability partnerships, what people know as LLPs. Now, again, part of the reason why this has not been considered is simply because, again, like we've said, there was a lack of awareness. But then if your need, for example, was business continuance, you have rental apartments, you want to ensure, or even if it's not rental, you have some form of business dealing in the properties that you own. You want to ensure that there's a form of continuity in the event of anything. And so having this structured in the way, in the form of a company or an LLP ensures that there's an element of continuity in addition to offering the limited liability protection. So it's about ensuring that, you see, these strategies are not just in the event of your death.
No, they're
actually things that
management.
you will employ. Exactly. These are things that you will have to use or would recommend that you use during your lifetime. So, for example, let me give you like a very simple example. I deal in real estate. I purchase a property. I decide to rent it out. Goes well. I get from the income, I'm able to rent out another and another and another. So over the next 10 years, I've built a portfolio of like, let's say 20 houses. These 20 houses are in my name. So what happens if, let's say, there's a fire in one and, there was negligence by one of my tenants. So all my other 19 properties are suddenly at risk simply because I have all these things in my name. Then what happens again, if I want to pass these properties, all 20 of them, to my kids, but I want them to get them in different shares. Now, having such an ownership structure can be tricky until you bring in the element of a company or an LLP. Because when we're using a company, we can even use multiple companies.
Right.
We can be able to ensure that each of the beneficiaries you have in mind has an element of control during your lifetime. You can literally teach them what to do with what you're leaving them.
Facts.
In addition to that, you'll be able to actually separate the liability element in that if anything were to happen to one, all the others are safe. And this is not a strategy that you wait to put in place when you have multiple properties. Because again, like we said, the cost of cure is very expensive.
And life happens.
And so that is something that you need to consider from the point of you decide that I am acquiring property. Yes. This is not something you think about after you have already acquired the property. And if you have already acquired the property, then it is something you have to think about in terms of moving forward. What does this look like?
Because at the end of the day, even if you have a property you've already acquired, you can still roll it into an entity.
Exactly, because now that's the other advantage. These entities, again, depending on your needs, you can always transfer property into the entities and out of the entities. Remember, the main thing here was control. In fact, if I was to put this in one statement, I would simply say you are future-proofing your investments.
Facts.
So that is what you're doing. You're future-proofing your investments, ensuring that you have accounted for unforeseen scenarios.
And even the scene, right? This is fantastic, dude. And at Roots, our whole thing is we built an end-to-end solution, right, to help people navigate the process of real estate investing, asset ownership, end-to-end. Everything from planning, legal structuring, transaction management, the actual purchasing of the property, because that's also got its own legal stuff, and the property management element. So thinking about it end-to-end. And this legal structuring element, I'm really excited about that because, it's it is. When you just think about the risks associated with not being aware of things, I mean, I can tell you kinds of stories about my own experience, some of the things we're dealing with, right, in our businesses.
Yes.
But this is really cool. We are committed to making life better. Right, simpler. Right, it shouldn't just be accessible to those who have bags of money, right? Like this is just it's real life, and it should be common knowledge and common solutions. So I mean, with that said, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of give a parting shot before we wrap it up over here.
All right. I think one of the things that you've mentioned and I really like is that Roots is offering an end-to-end product, because thinking about it, if I was to run a law firm, you were to approach me and ask me to do this for you because you have recognized the need, I would still have to charge you based on what we talked about, the advocate's remuneration order. And this is assuming you already have this property. And the beauty about having a one-stop shop is that everything is under one roof.
Right.
So whatever it is that you need, you can be able to find it there.
Right.
And so in terms of a parting shot, I think what I would say is, I believe by now you have seen the need for this.
Right. Me
like
personally, that's why I built it. That's why we're building it.
That's why you're building it. But then you see, even in listening to us, let's say you come across this, you come across some marketing, some element of this, and you're like, okay, I have seen the need for this. My challenge to anyone listening to this would be, it is not enough to just hear it.
Yeah, you got to take action.
You have to take action.
Yeah.
Because knowledge that is not implemented is simply a waste.
Yeah.
It's actually simply a waste.
Yeah.
So that would be my parting shot.
Yeah. Final question for you. As a legal professional working at Roots, what, maybe give us a sense of what that means to you, or in terms of, just how do you think about that?
I think of it in terms of we are providing a solution that the world desperately needs. I mean, nowadays, whenever you scroll Twitter or whatever social media you're a fan of, you'll find guys complaining about how I sent so-and-so money. I trusted a friend. I trusted a relative. I wanted to do A, B, C, D. And you see the amount of pain, the amount of, just regret in some of these conversations is usually so high.
Yeah.
And sometimes I personally really feel for them. Having lived there, I know what it takes to actually earn some of these monies.
Right.
And so some of the things that people have to do are not pretty.
Right.
Yeah, or even if they are, then it's not easy.
It's still blood, sweat, and tears.
Exactly.
It's still your life.
It's still your life.
Yeah.
And so what I think of Roots is that this is a solution that people need. Because the moment you hear it, you know you need it.
Right.
And this is not just relating to, the legal structuring. The legal structuring in and of itself is important. But then how many places will you go to and they'll actually advise you on how to properly invest? There are very few places that can manage the process for you end to end. From sourcing for properties, developers, doing due diligence, structuring your agreements, reviewing them, including legal guys, you have data analysts, you have this entire team, that is purely devoted to ensuring that you achieve your goals.
Right.
And I think for me, that in and of itself makes this a very wonderful place to be. And I would invite anyone listening to us to, come and join us.
Come and join us, man. This is fun. I mean, when you're if you're going to do anything in life, it might as well be something worth doing.
Yeah.
Right. And we feel that way every day. It's got its challenges. But the future is fantastic. And for me, success is really the individual people who will benefit from what we do. It's not about, everything that we do is technical and all that. But it's about the people. I believe what makes me come alive is this notion of working on things that put the individual at the center and building from there backwards. Every single venture I've ever worked on, that gets me excited. It's always going to the person and saying and working from there backwards. And you design this whole thing around that idea, right? Putting the investor in the middle and building an aircraft carrier for you. So with that, thank you for watching till this point. I hope you enjoyed it. There'll be more to come. So until next time, have a good one.